Welcome everyone to our first session of the final day of the conference. My name is Kristina and I am a moderator for this session. We will start off with a presentation from Triin Lutsoja. Triin is a fundraising manager at Nähtamatud Loomad, Open Cages Estonia. She has experience in running successful fundraising campaigns, writing grant proposals, training volunteers, and coordinating welfare campaigns. In her presentation, Triin will focus on the high potential that every one of us has to successfully fundraise. More often than we'd like to admit, we ourselves are our biggest obstacles. For example, our certain beliefs about money and donating are standing in the way of fulfilling our mission to help animals. However, no fancy tools, strategies, or approaches will replace the right mindset. So in her presentation, we can all figure out exactly which beliefs and fears are holding us back and how to cope with them. Before we start with the presentation, then a reminder to all of our attendees, please write your questions to Triin in the live questions tab, and Triin is here and will answer your questions after the talk. Additionally, Triin has agreed to stay for a networking session after the talk, for which we will send a Zoom link in the chat. Okay, great. So let's now learn from Triin, and Plenum, can you please start the recording?
Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming here to learn about fundraising. I'm sure that the last 2 days have been full of wonderful new ideas and also wonderful new people. And I hope that this talk can also help you become a better activist for all of the animals we're trying to help here. In my talk, I'm not going to focus on the differences between the social and economic circumstances in different countries. I couldn't even do that because I haven't researched that enough. But instead, I'm going to focus on the psychological effects of fundraising. And you're going to see what I mean really soon. Stay with me. This talk will help you recognize your unhelpful thoughts and beliefs about fundraising. See them as the faulty thoughts they actually are, and challenge these thoughts to think more clearly. But first, a little bit about me. I first became an activist for Nähtamatud Loomad in 2017. Shortly after that, I joined the fundraising team as a volunteer. And shortly after that, in the same year, I was hired as the fundraiser. After that, during the 2 years, I helped to build an organization with a budget of 300,000 euros. And now I'm back to volunteering in the fundraising team. As you can see, I don't have tons of experience, and that's exactly my point. Everyone can do it. So wherever you and your organization are, please know that you can do fundraising good. You just have to start with small steps, and also with great tools. You have to have a great mindset to fundraise successfully. The first thing I want to say is that everyone is a fundraiser. I'm quite sure that none of us doubts that we as activists need money to succeed. We have big goals, ambitious goals, and we couldn't do those things without money. Just take a minute to think, what kind of goals does your organization have? In 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? And what kind of activities do you have to do in order to achieve those goals? And then how much do these activities cost? Do you need to buy something, some services, or pay somebody to do it? It takes a lot of money. In our organization, one of our many goals is to decrease meat consumption. We want to cut the meat consumption in half by 2040. That's madness. Where would you even begin? This is really an ambitious goal, and we really have to have good people and a lot of money to do it. So, in order to make that happen, since day one of the organization, we have always prioritized fundraising. Almost right away, we started reading about fundraising books and stuff. In our second year as an organization, we already hired a fundraiser, me, of course. And after that, we have always had a fundraiser, a paid fundraiser in our team. Also, all of the other employees have to devote 10 to 15% of their working hours to fundraising. So it's not only the fundraiser who is doing the fundraising, it's all of the team. And currently we're working on engaging more and more volunteers into our fundraising activities so that we can get more and more people who are bringing in the resources. But it's not as easy. It's not as easy as we thought, because not only the volunteers, but also we ourselves, we tend to have some irrational fears about fundraising. So in order to start fundraising on a large scale, we need to tackle the psychological side of it. And even though these fears aren't rational, they are still there and they are preventing us from moving ahead. So let's take a moment and see what are these things that our team members or ourselves are worried about when it comes to asking for money. Take a moment to think about yourself. What are the things that you are afraid of? Or maybe you can think of something that your teammate is afraid of when it comes to fundraising. What are these thoughts and fears that you have that are preventing you from raising necessary funds for your cause? So let's take a look at some of the stuff that people say that they're afraid of when it comes to fundraising. My friends would stop being my friends if I'd start asking for their money. There are other big problems in our society. Nobody will care enough about farm animals to donate. The potential donor doesn't care about farm animals. It's not possible to fundraise in my country. People think I'm annoyingly salesy, like a telemarketer. They don't want to hear what I have to say. I would feel like a beggar, like I'm taking their money away from them unfairly. As you can see, there are a lot of negative thoughts, and I'm sure that whoever has these thoughts isn't too eager to go and start fundraising. So the first thing we would have to do is figure out whether these things are true. Is it true that if I would ask somebody for money, they would stop being my friend? Or is it true that all of the other topics in our society are more important than, and absolutely nobody cares about farm animals? And so on. But first, let's dive into psychology. If you have ever been in therapy, or you might have encountered cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, then this might be very familiar to you. In cognitive behavioral therapy, they have these things called cognitive distortions or thinking errors. And recognizing your thinking errors can be a true value when you're dealing with anxious thoughts about fundraising. So, what are thinking errors? They are faulty patterns of thinking. It's like you have a bug in your system That's definitely something to avoid when dealing with matters of life and death. You want to be able to think as clearly as possible. They occur when the things you are thinking do not match up with reality. Sometimes we just make wrong conclusions because we had wrong assumptions. Those who commit thinking errors often don't realize they're doing so. So let's help each other out by getting to know different kinds of thinking errors and try to recognize them. As you can see from the picture, there are many kinds of thinking errors. For example, all or nothing thinking, blaming, emotional reasoning, and so on. There are many of these thinking errors, and I encourage you to check them out. Just type in thinking errors or cognitive distortions in Google and everything will just pop up. So how to deal with an anxious thought like the ones I presented a few slides ago? Let's dive in. But first, I would like to share a quote from Seneca. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. And if you really think about it, most of our suffering actually happens in our heads. We worry about stuff, we think horrible things about ourselves or other people, but actually, when you look around, in reality, everything seems okay. So, most of our worries and our thoughts are just in our head and they don't have nothing in common with the reality. So, let's try to make that suffering a little bit smaller. So, in order to show you what I mean, let's take the last thought from the slide, which was, I would feel like a beggar, like I'm taking their money away from them unfairly. Let's take this thought as an example to make it smaller, try to get rid of the fears, and get into fundraising. So the first thing that cognitive behavioral therapy suggests you do is notice your thoughts. First, just notice them. Be very curious but friendly and try to pick up all of the thoughts that are going around in your head. Then you need to realize that a thought is just a thought. A thought is not a fact. For example, if I would ask you to think about a talking elephant, really think about it, then you might notice that it was me who put the talking elephant into your heads. And it wasn't your thought, actually. It wasn't your thought. You didn't think of the talking elephant. I did. It was my thought. And also, it's not a fact. A talking elephant is not real, so it cannot be a fact. The same applies to thoughts. A thought is just a thought. A thought of a talking elephant is just a thought. It doesn't exist. It's not a fact. It's just a thought, and you don't have to believe every thought. Instead, you can think, well, that was just a random thought. No wonder that my pulse quickened if my brain imagines such awful pictures. But it was just a thought, and I can let it go. The next step would be to try to diagnose the thought. Try to figure out what kind of cognitive distortion it is. I figured that it's fortune telling. That is when you think you know how things are going to turn out. But none of us can actually predict the future. So therefore, it's just a faulty thought. Also, I think that this thought is also about emotional reasoning. That's when you believe that your emotional reaction to something is proof of that thought being true. I found a little bit labeling. Labeling appears in our thinking when we try to describe ourselves or other people by a single label. But the truth is that every one of us is so much more than just that one thing or feeling. So you shouldn't label people, and the label is not true. And last, I thought it might be mind reading. Mind reading is where you make an assumption that other people are looking down on you and where you become so convinced about this that you don't even bother to check it out whether that assumption is true. So after thinking about what kind of cognitive distortion it might be, let's try and challenge this thought. I have prepared some questions on the left and some answers on the right. So the first question could be, what evidence proves or disproves that my thought is valid? I thought about it and I think I found some proof that actually proves that this thought is true. For example, I already feel bad just thinking about the situation where I would have to ask money. So I think that this could be proof enough to say that this thought as a whole is true. And also, if the person I'm going to ask for money says yes, I will have taken their money. And then I thought about whether I have evidence that this thought is not valid. And I found that I haven't even asked anyone yet. So how will I know what happens? So now I have evidence for and against that thought, and I can think further. What are the consequences of believing that thought? Well, if I truly believe this thought that I would feel like a beggar, it would stop me from helping the animals because our organization wouldn't have enough resources. So the consequences are quite severe. If I really believe this thought that is in my head, it will stop me from helping animals. Next, could I think about this situation in a different way? Yes, of course. Let's try. Beggars usually never give donors anything in return. But if I'm asking for a donation, it's a whole different story. I'm not just taking the donor's money, but I'm giving something in return. I can give them the joy of donating. I think every one of you knows how good it is to donate. It's such a rush. It's a very good feeling. And besides joy, you're giving them results. It's not like you're taking the money just for yourself. No, you're doing something with it. You are creating actual change when it comes to animals. Which new thought might help me feel less anxious and more useful? I could think that, I do have something valuable to give. When a simple grocery store sells peanuts and bread and hummus, then my products that I'm selling are joy and results. And if I truly have something to give in return, then I shouldn't feel like a beggar. Then it's more like a transaction where they give you donations and you give them something valuable in return. This definitely helps me not to feel like a beggar. How likely is this feared scenario? I would say that this scenario where I'm afraid of being a beggar is more likely in the beginning when I'm just starting out and I don't have any experiences asking for money. But after a while, after some practicing, I might feel more calm and confident because it's not as new anymore. Is it possible that things can turn out just fine? So I think it is possible that after a few times, I might not feel so anxious anymore. And after even more times, I will feel more comfortable because I have had a lot of practice. So after answering all those previous questions, I could say that a more reasonable thought would be that it is always hard to start doing new things, but with practice I can improve. I can evolve. So instead of being afraid of feeling like a beggar, I can think that it's just a new thing. I can do it if I just practice. And also I can think that I do have something to give, so it's not begging. So this is the way I suggest you can work on your anxious thoughts to try to decrease their impact on your behavior. Because if the behavior you want is the ability to ask for money, to run successful fundraising campaigns, then we really need to be at our best. We need to think more positively, learn about fundraising, make some errors, and start all over again, and just not give up, and try to lessen the impact of those thoughts. If you want to learn more how to deal with these anxious thoughts about money and donations, then just Google cognitive distortions or cognitive behavioral therapy, and you will definitely find something that helps you get along. I hope this was helpful for you and your team members, even if you're just a beginner or you have done this for a while. Every one of us sometimes needs to recalculate things and try to find new ways to see some situations. So good luck to you all, and let's help a lot of animals. Thank you, and now it's time for Q&A.
Okay, thank you for this presentation and for these very useful recommendations, Triin. This is really interesting and super useful for all organizations. We now have some time for questions. So anyone in the audience, let us know which problems have you yourself encountered to fundraise for your organization or for specific campaigns. What are the things that may be keeping you back to be more better at it? And write your questions in the live questions tab, and Triin will answer these questions here. So we do have some questions already popping up, so I would just start. So Anna would like to ask Triin. In her organization, they have an internal dispute whether they should fundraise or not. She thinks it's a good idea because it would help them to buy better equipment for street activism and also be able to start bigger campaigns. However, some people in her group say that if we ask people for money, they will just buy themselves a clear conscience without changing their behavior to a vegan lifestyle or more plant-based diet. So at the moment, what they do is that they only have a donation box at their desk where they offer flyers and information for free. But even this little begging is an issue for some group members. They have more an AV approach, all or nothing abolitionist from 0 to 100. So what would you recommend? Could she use the challenging questions you told us when talking to this with our group members?
Yeah, I would definitely suggest that. But there were some other questions before, like about the buying themselves a clear conscience. Well, that's definitely not something that I believe in. In psychology, they talk about this thing called foot in the door technique. And I think that donating works in a similar way. Even if someone who is still eating meat or, I don't know, riding a horse or whatever is donating to you, it might help them to start thinking in new ways, because it's such a small thing to do for that donor, just to donate some money. And afterwards, maybe you can even contact them, send them newsletters or new information, and they might start changing their behavior. So donating could be a really useful tool to help them take the first steps toward being kinder to animals and being a more aware person who buys products. Yeah, but if begging is an issue, then definitely try to challenge your thoughts. And I think it's really important not to tell your team members or volunteers that you are wrong when you think about that and you have stupid fears and they're just not useful. That won't help anyone. You really have to talk to your team members, be kind with them, because they really have worries and they feel very bad about whatever negative thoughts they have, and they just need help to understand that whatever thoughts they're having, they might not be true. Sometimes they can turn out to be true, but not always. So it's always useful to challenge these thoughts to find out whether they're true or not.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Gabriela. She firstly says, thank you, Triin, for your presentation. It's very smart using CBT for challenging thoughts fundraisers may have. How did your team respond when you used CBT on their thoughts? Did people like it, or did they feel like doing therapy they didn't ask for?
Well, I have done the same training for my team only once. I think it was 2 months ago. And everyone who was at the training, they said that it was wonderful and they really needed it. And they didn't have any negative thoughts about me forcing therapy on them, or at least nobody told me. Everybody looked happy and they had great thoughts. They had great ideas how to challenge their thoughts. And I hope to repeat that training many more times in order to get to everybody in our organization.
Thank you. And as someone who benefited from your training, then I can also say that I did not feel like a forced therapy, but I just think it's really good to talk openly about these things. So yeah, that's really great. While the audience is still typing some questions, then perhaps I would have a question of my own as well. So what would you recommend to do if, for example, I'm feeling that I'm not convincing enough to fundraise? For example, that my arguments or convincing skills are not good enough. What would you say is more beneficial? Is it still worth a try, or should this be left for better suiting, more convincing people?
Well, I think that fundraising is possibly something new it's a new skill for everyone. For example, I'm actually a trained musician. And I only came across fundraising because I started volunteering for animals. And then I had to study what fundraising is from zero. So I think there are many people in animal protection organizations who are just starting out with fundraising and activism and convincing people. So it's just a new skill that needs more time. So definitely don't tell yourself that I'm no good at this, so I won't even try to get better, because it's a skill and you will get better. And another thing that you said, that maybe it's not a good idea to think about it as convincing people, because people don't like to be convinced. So maybe when you encounter somebody who might become a donor, who is interested in the topic, try to listen to them more and not convince them. It's always a good idea to listen what people have to say, because it creates a nice atmosphere and they really feel heard, because usually they have some questions or issues with the topic of helping animals, and it's always a good idea to listen what they have to say and maybe not try to tell them they're wrong all the time. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, I think that's really great advice and really good reminder. Unfortunately, we don't have time for more questions at the moment, but we can continue in the networking room. So everyone who still has some more questions to Triin or would like to learn more, then just follow the Zoom link we posted in the chat, and we will see you here. So thank you again to Triin for your wonderful presentation. Thank you everyone attending this talk for asking your questions. And yeah, see you either in the networking session or in some other talks in our last day of the conference. So thank you everyone.
Thank you.